What's going on, guys? It's Bromley, and today I want to talk about aspect of programming that I think newbies struggle with because there's some conflicting information as far as how you should approach it, and that's whether or not you should modify programs, whether or not you should tweak or mess with templates. So I want to talk about that, add some clarity to it, because there's a post on a Facebook forum, Facebook group, and some kid was asking for advice, and he was getting a lot of conflicting advice, and I was getting anxiety because I was relating to being in that position where I'm lost, where I couldn't parse out all the good advice from people who earn their opinions from all of the people that were just making noise because they had a keyboard in front of them. So it's really stressful to try to get over that hump. So I'm going to give some insight into that. A couple pieces of news. For one, I did get invited to do a Reddit AMA on the weight room subreddit. So I'm pretty excited about that. That's going down in a week. That's next Wednesday at 2 p.m., I think. So I'll keep you guys updated on that. So get your questions ready. The weirder, the better. Also, remember, base strength's $9.99, EmpireBarbellStore.com. Link is in the description. And go ahead and check out the Patreon because that's where we are taking all these questions from. So lucky you, if you don't want to join the Patreon, you get to show up on the AMA in about a week, and we'll handle that. So first crack at that, pretty excited for it. So on this particular topic, you got a kid, he was wanting to write out his own strongman program. He had a basic 2 upper, 2 lower body split with a strongman event day on the 5th day. I think he had vertical push, vertical pull, and then he had squat and deadlift. So it's pretty standard. We've seen a million templates like that, right? Bench, overhead, squat, deadlift, and then the 5th day is event day. It's not the only way to run it, but that is the most common, having your regular barbell stuff throughout the week and then your event stuff on one day. And he had just a basic progression. He had his main lift for some threshold that he was working in, and they were a little different on each one. And then it looked like he had a compound variation, some type of analog for the main movement that day, followed up with some accessory work, some isolation work, or like targeted tricep work for pressing, upper back work on some days. And then on his off days, he was doing like a 1 or 2 mile walk with like carrying some buckets of sand or something, or sled push. It looked like general GPP stuff. So in this whole list of responses, this kid was just getting inundated with really bad advice. Not just bad advice, but people were being like aggressive about it. So the one thing that stood out was the idea of overtraining. Now, that's not really related to this topic, but I want to cover that too, where people saw, 5 days a week training, that's going to eat you up. And all that accessory, you can't do all that accessory. I don't know anybody that's ever actually sustained overtraining or under recovery, however you want to specify that, from doing a couple sets of isolation work at the end of the workout. That's like lifting 101. In fact, if you look what most newbies and even some veterans that have been training for a few years on their own, what they get away with when they've been training on their own, if they've been doing just general gym work or training for aesthetics or whatever, people adapt to pretty high levels of work, especially when you're talking about smaller movements, isolation, a lot of machines and variations like that. Those do not eat you up the same way that compound lifts do. If you're going in, you're trying to do 5 different heavy compound exercises, that'll eat you up. If you're going in, you're trying to do 5 different isolation exercises, your metabolism will be up. You'll be sore afterwards. That doesn't create the same systemic impact. Nobody's ever overtrained from doing 2 sets of arms at the end of the workout. So that was getting in my craw a little bit. There's this pendulum swing that goes back and forth where people kind of hinge on very vague pieces of advice. So one is like, more isn't always better. It's like, that's correct. More isn't always better. But that's a very vague statement that you can't put into action without a lot more information, which makes it useless. Sometimes more is better. So unless you can actually specify when it is and when it isn't, and how to figure that out as you go along, you're not giving any worthwhile advice. So in as much as, there's been a push from, try to prevent lifters from going crazy and running themselves in the ground, which can happen. The way the pendulum is swung back the other way is just by default suggesting that people always do less or as minimum as possible, which isn't really right either. So that bothered me a little bit. But getting into the other component that this kid was having to deal with, which is that he should not be modifying programs. According to him, this was a modified version of Thor's power program that he tweaked with some movements he thought addressed his own weaknesses, and then tried applying it to a strongman template, which is basically just doing strongman on Saturdays. And immediately somebody was jumping down his throat being like, you're new, you have no business trying to program from yourself. Go find this template. Go find a coach. Why are you modifying templates? If you modify it, it won't work, on and on and on. Now, the thing to understand is that these cookie cutter templates, they are not some type of magic music script that have to be played with exact precision, or else you're going to forfeit all of the gains. It's like you're trying to recite some incantation, and if any syllable is off, then the whole spell is going to fall apart. All of these programs, all of these templates that you see, the ones that are kind of mass sold, are created based on two things. One are some very broad principles that work. They work well. We know they work well. And they also work 100 different ways. So like progressive overload, they'll have some method of progressive overload. They'll address recovery. They'll have a split that is largely sustainable by most people. It won't go crazy too far one direction or the other. It'll require some selection of good proven movements, right? They all lean on compound movements. When you put the right amount of valuable primary principles in the same recipe, you're going to get a pretty good result no matter what you do. And especially if you're new, you don't have to walk this tightrope. As you get more advanced, yeah, but by the time you're advanced, then you know how you respond. So it's not so much a question. So that's thing one, right? Broad principles that work, but they also work 100 different ways. Two is some arbitrary confirmation of sets and reps that is used also as a branding tool. So things that look clean on paper, things that are catchy. 531 is the most obvious one, and Wendler's even cracked jokes about 531 being a catchy title. When he talks about things in more complex terms, we're like, yeah, it's not as catchy as 531, but cube method is a good one. You have 3 different thresholds that are progressed over 3 weeks, right? So there's this 3 by 3 by 3. You look at simple stuff, linear progressions, starting straight through Texas method, gray skull. You look at the Juggernaut method, you look at all the fifth set, you look at all these ebooks, and they have some set and rep scheme that lends itself to the title that's easy to follow. And it's not that there's anything magical about the way they did it. A lot of the changes to these templates are arbitrary, and they get to be arbitrary because they've already covered the big bases. They've checked the big boxes, which means the rest can be, let's say, a little different for the sake of being different, or it can go out of its way to set itself apart from some other method. And it can be the time frames different. It can be the exercise rotations a little bit different. It can be the exact repetition threshold. If you're a Ripito fan, you live and die by fives. But, oh my God, if you have a program that's based around triples, is that not going to work? Of course it's going to work, as long as the other big boxes are checked. So these templates get by because they do check the big boxes. But the devil is in the details, and individuality reigns supreme. What is ultimately going to work over a big population, again, is going back to the Soviet Olympic experiments. If you have a bunch of disposable athletes and you just want to make sure the highest number of them get to compete so that they have an opportunity of getting on the podium, that is a different approach than figuring out what works best for you. So we can look at things like, over an aggregate of people, this works really well for 60%, but this works really well for 72%. So that's a better approach because it displaces fewer people. But then you can ask, okay, for the people it worked for, how well did it work? That's a different question than asking, okay, for you, what can you get away with, and how are we going to modify things for you, your recovery ability, your specific weaknesses, the skill set that you already bring to the table. That's different. That's very individual. So everybody is best suited by starting with a template, because we do all practice first by mimicking, right? So you want to start something pre-established, and that's going to expose you to those primary principles. But as long as you are remembering that it is those primary principles that are causing it to work, that gives you a lot of leeway with tweaking things once you come across something that isn't working for you. You might find that the way they have squats and deadlifts paired in the same week absolutely chews you up for whatever reason. It could be because of weaknesses you have. It could be because you're inefficient, so you're expending a lot more energy than you need to on one of the lifts. It could be because of your leverages or tendon insertions, biological stuff you really can't control or train for. And that's going to merit some switch. You might find that you have to put those exercises further apart. You might find that you don't respond as well in one rep threshold for one lift as you might another. There's a million different things you might be able to acknowledge and troubleshoot that are holding you up, and you need the ability to change those. Now, here's the thing with changing programs. You should change as needed. That doesn't mean go in and start dicking around just because you can. If your car's broken, get in there, turn some screws, figure out what's wrong, and fix it. But if you're a guy that's, going on a meth binge, so at 3 a.m., you're just fucking with your engine because you got all this nervous energy, that's an entirely different thing, and that does make you an idiot. So don't do that. If you paid somebody to write you a template based around your individual circumstances, and they put a lot of time and effort trying to troubleshoot what works for you, and you go in and just tweak it for the sake of it, yeah, that's frustrating, that's dumb, you don't get anything out of that. But you do need to pay attention. You do need to adhere to these principles while maneuvering around some of the other stuff that might not work the way you're put together. So this whole wisdom that you shouldn't mess with programs, and I mean, going back to Wendler, like I am a fan of 531 for the most part, but I am critical of some of the other parts of his brand. And he put in his book in 531, he said, if you change this program, you're not doing my program. And I get it. He's trying to avoid that tweaker type of lifter that just fiddles with shit to fiddle with it, and they're not really doing anything. And they're just hopping around and trying everything that comes into their sphere, and they're a lint roller, and they just pick up a bunch of shit as they go along and start applying it, and it's not productive. But at the same time, he also gave 30 different arbitrary variations for how to arrange training without a ton of insight on when or why you would do it. And those are all variations. Those are all arbitrary changes you could potentially make. So that was kind of like the worst of both worlds. It's like, here's a bunch of options that you can fuck around with, but also not really any of the relevant information on why you would or who it's appropriate for, depending which problem you're into. So anyways, that wisdom needs to die. You absolutely should be messing with your program as needed. Even if you do have a coach, that's why you give feedback. That's why you give the information on how you're doing to them so they can get more information on how to tailor this to you. Going through periods where you do that for yourself will give you personally more insight on how you're put together, how you respond, and what you can and can't get away with. And that is invaluable. I can't stress enough. That is invaluable for anybody who wants to be competitive. You have to know how your body works and how it responds to training. There's a point where, yes, you can defer to somebody who's more knowledgeable than you, but not infinitely. You can't do that infinitely. You're still on the hook for knowing yourself well enough to be able to navigate around just a basic program. And just remember, when you start to doubt yourself, people have been getting strong on their own for like over 100 years, okay? Getting strong is actually very easy. The big thing where people trip up is staying in one piece, staying healthy. And you should be able, if you're paying attention, you should be able to navigate around that. So don't think that you have to take on the equivalent of a new car payment because you want to get strong. Coaching is great if you find a good one, but for as much as you might get an edge from finding a good coach, knowing that the coach you hired is actually good or is going to do the things they claim to, that's a shot in the dark because everybody and their mom is a coach these days. So there's no good way you can really defer responsibility or accountability to anybody else. You're the lifter, you're responsible. Pay attention, make changes as needed. So that is my rant on that. Thank you. I just had to get that off my chest. Thank you for watching. Go ahead and leave questions in the comment box. Tune in next week, Wednesday, 2 p.m. We're doing the Reddit AMA, and save up your questions for that. I'm preparing to be on my toes. I expect some weird ones. I expect someone to throw me off guard. So I'm going to have my fingers all limber, ready to type it 1,000 words a minute so I can keep up with the influx of questions you get, because I'm coming in deep. They're going to be paragraphs. They're going to be things I can screenshot and repurpose for textbooks in the future. It's going to be my best, highest quality stuff. So be ready for that. Thanks for watching, guys. Till next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.